Welcome to the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast powered by Hiscox. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. Throughout my career, I've had side hustles, some of which have turned into real businesses. But first and foremost, I'm a serial technology entrepreneur. In the creator space, we hear plenty of advice on how to hustle harder and why you can sleep when you're dead. On this show, we ask new questions in hopes of getting new answers. Questions like, how can small businesses work smarter? How do you achieve balance between work and family? How can we redefine success in our businesses so that we don't burn out after year 3? Every week, I sit down with business founders at various stages of their side hustle to small business journey. These entrepreneurs are pushing the envelope while keeping their values. Keep listening for conversation, context, and camaraderie. Today's guest is Brian Parenteau, the founder of multiple award-winning restaurants in Florida, from Fort Lauderdale to Miami and more. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm excited to have you on because I feel like everybody always has an idea of like, oh, I want to start a restaurant one day. And maybe you're going to disabuse us of those dreams or maybe reinforce them in a minute. But before we get into that, give us a little bit about your background and what got you to where you are today.
Well, I moved to South Florida years ago. When I finished college, I came down here with dreams of, getting a nice job using my degree, which was management, business management. And I took a job as a barback in a nightclub in South Beach to, make ends meet, to fill the gaps. And from there, it spilled over into something I enjoyed, and I went on a little bit further, became a bartender and a server, and then I kept progressing forward, and then I eventually became a bar manager, and then I got really good at the job, and I started helping a restaurant group opening up different concepts, and then eventually I took everything I learned, what not to do, and I went off on my own and started my first restaurant 7 years ago.
So it sounds like you're very much an accidental restaurateur entrepreneur in this.
Absolutely. My whole life, all through college, all through high school, I never want to work weekends. I don't want to work holidays. I absolutely loathe the hospitality business. Never wanted to work weekends. I wanted to go out on weekends. So it really, really flipped the script.
Right.
And I started working in it and loving it.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. It's so funny. For so many entrepreneurs, I think that tends to be the story, is that you just accidentally fall into it. And then this is not what I wanted to do, but I enjoy it so much. Like for me, I knew I never wanted to write software as a job because my software always has bugs in it. And so that's why I was an electrical engineer. Yeah, I ended up only starting software businesses, and that's all I've ever done. And so it's just so funny. So for you, I assume this was your first time being an entrepreneur. Was there anything entrepreneurial like when you were a kid, or were there any entrepreneurs in the family?
Yeah, no, I did a couple small entrepreneurial, call them outbursts throughout the years when I was working in hospitality. I tried to open up like a used car business selling, used cars online. And I had a really, really small warehouse that would fit a couple cars. And I tried that for about 3 years. I didn't have much success in it. I wasn't passionate about it. I thought I would like it because I could drive a cool, different car, but all the cars I bought were never cool. And then eventually after that, I linked up with a guy I went to college with, and he was running a lighting company. And together we opened up kind of like an events venue, and we hosted some bar mitzvahs, maybe a wedding, some, adult birthday parties in this little event venue. It wasn't giant, but it wasn't small. And I did that for, 1 or 2 years. And once again, it was something I wasn't overly passionate about. And eventually it just kind of fizzled out. But in the background, the whole time, I was always working in hospitality, filling in those days off, as a bartender to make that extra cash to carry me through to, the next venture that I eventually fell into
Yeah, but it sounds like you got a little bit of taste of hospitality by doing the event venue, because that's like a very intense situation there. I've seen that too. I've run events as well, and it's a tough business to do that.
It's really, really tough business because all the events, they fall on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They don't
Yeah,
fall during the week. And you have to turn that venue around in like, 6 hours or less. You'd have the event running from 8 to midnight, maybe 2 in the morning. And then the people that have the event for the following night, they're in there at 8, 9, 10 in the morning decorating. So you
right.
have to go in there, clean, paint, set up different lighting, get their logos up
Yeah,
and all this different stuff before they. So it's like you worked, around the clock doing that business, but you only worked Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
right. Yeah,
And then you'd have a lot of downtime, which didn't make good for a good financial month because it's like you're making money sometimes and then a lot of time you're not making money and you
right.
still have all the permanent bills.
Yeah. So moving forward to the restaurant business, then kind of going through this process, how did you end up like making that leap and starting the first business for yourself?
I always felt like I wanted to own something. It didn't necessarily need to be a restaurant or a bar or anything like that. But over the years, I would meet people, especially working at these restaurants and bars, and people thought I did a pretty good job. So people would, they would pick my brains, they would pitch me on stuff. And I got pitched on a couple ideas like, hey, would you like to be a minority investor in this place in Miami? And I always ran, through their proposals and asked a lot of questions. And I kind of watched how these people did. And eventually I kind of started to put something together myself. I eventually met my business partner while working at one of the restaurants that I was employed at. He was one of the minority owners there, and he eventually went off on his own, and I went with him. And that's how we started the first venture.
And what was the first venture?
It's called Drink Bar and Lounge. So this is just a cocktail bar. So
Okay.
this is where it makes sense. I made the leap, but I didn't make the leap into this massive, restaurant with
Right.
multiple employees. I kept it small. I kept my vision clear, and I launched a bar, a
Yeah.
cocktail bar, and did it with a small amount of capital in a small location, and had a lot of success with it. And that's what spiraled into the next three.
Yeah. So in terms of starting that, a lot of people that start these types of things, they're like, oh, I'm just gonna, buy the business and then somebody else will run it, whatever. And I often tell people like that, like once you buy the business, like there's gonna be a time where something goes wrong. You're gonna have to work in the business. Like that ends up happening. How much did you work in the business when it started?
Nonstop. I worked open to close 6, 7 days a week. And
Were you bartending or were you just managing? Like what were you doing?
I was doing everything. I was bartending, managing, doing the ordering, doing the inventory. I was pretty much hands on. I ran every aspect of that first location. There wasn't anything I didn't know.
Yeah. And was your motivation in doing that because it saved you money because you didn't have to hire? Or was it because you wanted to make sure you knew everything that was going on? Like, what was your motivation?
I wanted to make sure it was getting done right, done
Right.
correctly. Like I have, a passion, and I have, certain ways I want things completed, and I needed to make sure that it was getting done that way. So I took the reins and made sure that it was being done.
Yeah.
So over time, I could teach other people and they could take over.
Right. So how long, in terms of starting that one, how long was it? Did you start paying yourself right away or was there some gap in time before you started getting paid?
Yeah, there was a big gap. For that first year, I lived off, the bartender tips, the few shifts I worked a week, but I probably waited probably almost 1 year before the first payment out of the restaurant came. And it was a small one. And then as the business grew, then the payments grew, or disbursements grew.
Right. Was there anything that made you nervous about taking that leap and starting that on your own?
Absolutely. I mean, I made less money that first year we were open, way less money,
Yeah.
because I went from working, 5 shifts a week, the ability to make tips, and, making a decent wage because I was managing at the same time, to just, strictly working, 1 or 2 days, a little bit of management, and not paying myself for all the little things like inventory and ordering,
Right.
and setting up payroll and scheduling. That was all stuff, I did on my computer at home. It was like a tough way to like clock in and clock out. So yeah, I took a loss for the first year.
Yeah. And that's honestly that's the boring, necessary work of starting a business like that, right? Like nobody wants to do inventory or payroll. Like that's not really the fun part, but it's the necessary
brutal
part. It doesn't work
Yes.
unless you do all that.
Yeah.
So how long was it after that one before you then decided to start the second one?
I ran with that one from 2017 to 2019. And then the second one, I don't know, came into play. And I opened the second one right in the middle of COVID in 2020.
Wow. Right in the middle of COVID. So you already knew the pandemic and you're like, yeah, no, we're going to do it anyways.
Well, I started it before the pandemic, because there was a lot of construction, and then the pandemic hit, and it was just like, what do I do now? Do I stop? Do I move forward? So I just pushed forward. I delayed it a little bit, the opening, and then I opened, and, I had to have all the necessary pieces in play, partitions, social distancing, masks, all that stuff, which, we did, and we got through it.
Yeah. Did you still have the bar at that point, and you were still running that as well? Okay. So both simultaneously.
Yes, simultaneously.
And so since we're talking about the pandemic, how did the bar fare then during the pandemic?
It didn't fare well at all. I mean, for the first several months, they would not allow any bars to be open. You could only be open if you served food. So what I did was I filed for a restaurant license. And since I had a lot of time, since the business was closed, I got it quickly. I developed a food menu. I hired a chef, and I implemented food and reopened probably a couple weeks later.
Oh, wow. That was a good pivot and shift there. I'm sure a lot of your compatriots that ran just bars, did they end up shutting down, or what happened?
Most of them shut down. A couple of them came to us and like, how did you do this? And it's like, I didn't want to share my secrets, but I helped them the best I could.
Yeah, that makes sense. Crazy times. And now I'm sure you look back at that, and having survived that now, there's probably a lot of lessons from that experience. Like what have you walked away with through living through that pandemic?
Yeah. I mean, you just have to pivot. You have to adjust. You have to, figure out your strengths and weaknesses. You got to trim the fat. I learned a lot from that. And I think our businesses, after that really thrived.
Yeah.
We learned to do kind of a lot with less.
Right.
And, we had to make sure that we were serving up a great product, because you only got one shot at keeping these customers happy, especially during a time where customers aren't everywhere.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of, learning experiences there, and you just have to, adjust and pivot.
Yeah. So now, it looks like you're starting to expand into other cities outside of where you are in Fort Lauderdale. Talk to me about that and what's kind of the thought process there, because it's a lot harder to manage when you're not nearby at that point.
It's tremendously more difficult to manage, because in Fort Lauderdale, I have, 3 locations. They're all maybe a mile apart, very easy to get to. It's 10 minutes from where I live. It's very easy to manage. Now my 4th location's in, let's call it downtown Wynwood, Miami. And that's, 45 minutes to an hour away, depending on traffic. And it takes a while to get there. And once you're there, I have to make sure that I get everything done, because can't forget something and just be like, well, let me just go drop in, fight traffic for an hour. So yeah, it's been difficult. It's been fun, but it's been challenging at times, just trying to allocate my time to the right places and the right times.
Yeah. What motivated you to do that and open a location that's not that far away, but significantly far away from you?
I think I always wanted to be in a great big international city, and part of it, I guess, is ego. I've had a lot of success in Fort Lauderdale, and they're doing well. And Fort Lauderdale's, it's a small city, but I had dreams of, going into big cities, such as New York City, Chicago, Atlanta, and, Miami being the closest. I
Right.
said, that's the easy route to get to a big city. So I went down there, and that's how I opened it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So is the concept that you've opened up in Miami similar to the ones in Fort Lauderdale, or is it totally different?
They're similar, but different.
Yeah.
It's a little more edgy, a little more industrial. It's based off of my Mexican restaurant in Fort Lauderdale.
Uh-huh.
It's like elevated, edgier, more Miami version. Call it like an international version of my Mexican concept up here in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay. Okay, cool. And do you share in terms of starting that one up, did you end up sharing any of your staff that you already had and help kind of augment what you were doing in Miami, or was it totally separate?
Mostly separate. We shared kitchen staff.
Okay.
So we won't. Yeah, our corporate chef, his name is Tulio. He runs the Mexican concept in Fort Lauderdale as well as the Mexican concept down in Miami. And we took a couple of his people at the beginning, but right now it's just him. So he's the only shared employee.
Okay.
And everyone else is people we've trained and coached.
Yeah. And the motivation to do that is to maintain quality or kind of have an overall view of everything that's going on. Like, what's the motivation of having him over both areas?
Yeah, I mean, it's to oversee quality. He understands what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And so he knows how to, get his staff to follow or buy in.
Right.
And create the vision I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's change gears a little bit and talk about the hospitality industry as a whole, since you never went to school for hospitality and you just kind of fell into all of this. What kind of challenges have you faced as an entrepreneur in this industry?
I mean, I guess at the beginning, one of the biggest challenges was having people take me serious. I went from a bar back to a bartender, to an entrepreneur, but people were like, he was just a bartender. He was the guy I used to come in and have him pour me shots and, spill my guts too. So, that was kind of a challenge. A lot of people didn't take me serious, and, a lot of people were like, oh, that's just some crummy bar that you opened. It'll be closed in a couple of years. Now they're not saying that.
Yeah. Did you do anything to try to get over that kind of perception that people had of you?
I mean, I just worked hard, and I, worked really hard to make the brand successful. But besides that, I didn't post anything or
Right.
or fabricate anything to make myself look any different than I was. I just worked harder, because then therefore I'm going to open multiple concepts and show them that I'm serious.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how did you approach marketing for these businesses? Like from when you started to now, like, has it changed over time? How do you get the word out? How do you get people to know about you and make sure that people show up?
Yeah, I mean, marketing is a big part of it. There's so many moving parts to marketing, from ads to social media to PR. The first one, I used a lot of, my local resources, friends. I was, a first time opening a bar, so I was able to kind of reach out to my clientele and let them know. I mean, that coupled with social media and a couple other things, made it successful. But now my marketing approach is very, very different. Like, I use I use everything now. Back then it was a little more of approaching, friends and clients, and just letting them know, hey, I'm opening this place up, come on in. Now I don't know people in every market I open now, so I have to market to the masses. I mean, I'm still out there pounding the streets and knocking on doors and inviting local businesses and into my business, but it's definitely changed.
Yeah.
I can't rely so much on my personal brand or my
Right.
popularity. I can't rely on that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not that popular.
Can you remember back to the time when you had just the bar, and the first person showed up that you didn't know directly, like you hadn't invited to the bar? How did they find out about you? Do you remember?
I mean, I think it's just word of mouth.
Yeah.
I promote a great product, and I put out a great product. So I think word of mouth.
Yeah.
And people would come in and talk to me, and I treat everyone really, really well. So
Yeah. To me, that's always like the most exciting thing as an entrepreneur. When you create something, it's like, well, of course your friends and family are going to try it out and whatever. It's when that random person shows up that there is no way you have a connection to. You can't figure out how you have a connection to them. And somehow they heard about it or they found it or whatever. And they are using your product. Like, to me, that's like that aha moment, that golden period of like, oh yeah, this is all going to work out.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I have a lot of those moments now
Right.
because
Yeah.
I still have, some of the beginning moments where I know a lot of the clientele coming, and I promote to the clientele I know, but
Yeah.
it's when they bring back their friends and their friends' friends of friends.
Right.
And then random people start to hear about you, and then they see advertisements, they see, our brand on TV and stuff. And yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. Were you ever surprised by the growth that you've seen in your businesses as you enter this industry?
Blown away.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I don't, 7 years ago, if you said, "Oh, where will you be?" There was no way I was saying, "Oh, I'll be operating 4 restaurants,
Really?
doing
Yeah.
multi-millions of dollars in revenue."
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
So
was, if you can remember back, what was your projection of where you'd be? Like just one good bar and that's it? Or like, what did you think you were going to accomplish?
yeah, I think one good bar, and I always liked bartending, so I was like, I could just work my own bar,
So
set
you
the
were trying to be
vibe, and
Sam Malone at Cheers, basically,
yes,
is
exactly.
what your idea was.
That was it.
So let's since we've talked a little bit about kind of the history, let's talk a little bit more about that and think back to something that you would change and do differently if you could go back in time. Is there something that stands out to you of like, now that I know what I know, oh, I would have done this way differently?
I mean, the biggest thing is I would have taken the leap a lot sooner.
Really?
I was
Yeah.
I was putting it off, saving money, which I mean was a good thing, but I don't know why I didn't pull the trigger sooner. I
Yeah.
think I had been ready for plenty of years, and I think I just waited too long. So that's probably the big one. I should have, jumped ship or left my comfort zone a lot earlier.
Yeah. Why is it that you feel like you waited? What was it that held you back?
I think it's probably money. I was working hard and saving money, and I just wanted to make sure I had the right amount of money. But I lived so humbly, I lived so below my means this whole time because my end goal was to own a business.
Right.
So I did everything possible to live below my means. And that's how I was able to save the money to, start the first business.
Yeah.
And I mean, even to this day, I still live way below my means compared to a lot of other people.
Right.
And, and I could probably spend a lot more on a lot of different things, but, it's just like I like to have that safety net or that
Yeah.
safety blanket in place. And if something goes wrong, I don't stress it. I don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's a good way to live because you never know when a pandemic is going to show up at your
Yeah,
doorstep or
right.
anything else that is not predictable. So, was there anything that nudged you and caused you to finally take the leap that just sent you over the edge of like, okay, now is the time?
I guess it was just when I was working for a restaurant group, I was helping them open up restaurant concepts, and I was killing myself doing it. And I was working 15, 17-hour days,
Wow.
and I was kind of like, I can do this
Yeah.
on my own.
Right.
I don't need anyone now, and I won't need anyone doing it for myself.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess that was, my breaking point, I'd say. It
Yeah.
was when I really was like, all right, this is it. I'm going full force into this. I'm seeing what it takes to really open up a new concept. I can do this.
Yeah. That realization is something that drives, I think, a lot of people, and just knowing and being convinced that you can do it for yourself. Um, Along those lines, what advice would you give to somebody that's thinking about being like you and either starting a side hustle or launching a full-time business?
I would say, be humble and live below your means, save money, and dive in, and don't be afraid to, I guess, fail. But I think if you have a lot of passion, a lot of heart, and you do what's right, I think you'll be all right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. So thinking about kind of last question here for you, thinking about managing all of this stuff, are there any technologies or apps or systems that you have in place to help you manage and kind of get through the day? Because there's a ton of people that you're dealing with that are employees and a ton of different locations. You can't all, see them all at the same time. So what do you do to make it all work?
I mean, I just use my calendar and
Yeah.
just schedule everything up. I mean, that's probably the easiest thing. I mean, every time I'm on a call, it's like, if they want to set a meeting with me, send me a calendar invite. And if you
Yeah.
don't, we won't be able to do this.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's probably the best technology, because that allows me to, really schedule my time out. It allows me to really strategize.
Yeah.
Like today, I'm on with you. I got a 2:30 meeting after this, and then I got to drive to Miami. I got a 4 o'clock meeting down there and another one at 6. So
Yeah.
I have it all mapped out on my calendar. I have the travel times mapped out, so I know where I need to be. So
Yeah.
that's probably the technology I use the most. I mean, every business has other simpler technology, scheduling apps, which makes things a lot easier. Back when I started, it was a pencil and
Right.
a paper. Now we have scheduling apps that make things easier. Payroll, it's all automated now. You
Yeah.
just hit clock in and clock out and import numbers. So I guess a lot of those simpler technologies, QuickBooks, once again, that makes things a lot easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, all these new platforms work well.
Yeah. So I lied to you. There's actually one more question because you kind of sparked it with that answer. Thinking about your calendar, do you schedule time away for yourself from the business? Like, how do you think about like that time away? And is there blocks in your calendar specifically for that, or is it weeks? How do you do that?
I don't have anything specifically blocked out, but when things come up, I check my calendar. And if I can do it, then I pencil it in. Or, I just went to California for 5 days to see my family.
Uh-huh.
And I had to schedule it out. I had to strategize, see what the good week was. And then I scheduled it out, put it in my calendar, and people know not to reach out and contact me. And,
Yeah.
but it's very kind of not last minute, but I don't schedule vacation 6 months out.
Right.
When I go on vacation, I schedule it a couple weeks out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
okay. That's interesting advice there. Brian, where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
They can find me on my Instagram, and it's at Parenteau, Parenteau. You can follow my websites, which is bartulios.com, drinkftl.com, tuliostacos.com, and patiobarandpizza.com.
I love it. I love it. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast, powered by Hiscox. To learn more about how Hiscox can help protect your small business through intelligent insurance solutions, visit hiscox.com. And to hear more Side Hustle to Small Business stories or share your own story, visit hiscox.com/side hustle to small business. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. You can find more about me at my website, sanjayparekh.com.